Good morning or afternoon. I never know when you look at these things. This is the video for chapter 4 to kind of introduce you to the chapter. The last two chapters you have been on assumptions, value assumptions of deciding what you should do. What is the best choice for you to make? What is according to what you value, what choices should you make? What is right and what is wrong? The last chapter was on reality assumptions. In the real world, what do we see? Do we see those values, choices that you would make made? We may value world peace. That may be high on our value list. But in the real world, do we see that shared with the majority of people? Some, none, all. That's the difference between the choices that we feel are the difference between right and wrong and what we should be making or saying versus what happens in the real world. What do we see? And those are based upon factual information. So what do we see? What do we hear? What do we experience? That's reality assumptions. Now, this particular chapter chapter 4 is on inductive arguments. Inductive arguments differ from what we've been looking at so far. We have been looking at an issue, a question. And for those of you who haven't figured out it's a question, go back and look at my videos. Go back and look at the Practice Critical Reflection 1 and my answers. See if you are answering them like I expect you to. For those of you who are not doing issue and conclusions correctly, look at that practice answer sheet. It's open. It's open. Okay, going back to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is inductive reasoning. We have been looking at deductive reasoning up until now. Deductive is we have an issue. We need to make a conclusion, but we need to look at the evidence first. We need to look at the reasons that are given for this. We've been making a conclusion, then looking for the evidence the writer gives. Now, if we were making it instead of the writer, we would say, okay, I want to buy a car. I am not buying the first car I see. I want to look at gas mileage. I want to look at insurance rates. I want to look at repair costs, so forth and so on. Then we make a decision. That's deductive reasoning. We all do that. But we all do inductive reasoning also. Inductive is we have an issue. We make a tentative premise. We make a tentative conclusion. It's not permanent because we don't even know what the evidence is. So we say, I need to buy a car. Well, I think I'll buy a Volkswagen. Maybe. Tentative. Now I'm going to look at the evidence. I'm going to go drive a Volkswagen. I'm going to go drive a Buick. I'm going to go drive a Chevy. And after we have looked and done the evidence, then we decide, no, I don't think I do want to buy that. I'm going to buy this. So we make a tentative conclusion. Then we look at the evidence, and based upon the evidence, then we make our final conclusion. Think of drugs that are made. They just don't make a drug and say, okay, here it is, buy it, see if it works. No, they have to study it. Before a writer can use a survey or a poll as evidence in their writing to support their conclusion, they need to know what the results were on that. So they can't say, well, this poll said this, when they have to ask the questions to the people, can tabulate the results, see what the conclusions are before you can use it as evidence. You have to be careful when you listen to reporters on TV, on the internet, saying this poll showed 85% of the people believe this way. Well, unless you know how many people did they poll, what questions did they ask, how did they ask them, did they ask them the same way every single time they gave this poll? Did they only give it one time? Did they give it multiple? Were there 500 people or were there 5? I could give a poll to 10 people and come out and say 80% of the students at Chandler Gilbert responded in this way. I only asked 10 people. How stupid would that be for me to say that? But if I didn't let you know as the reader, you might believe me. So you are going to look at inductive reasoning. You are going to look at research, statistical research that is done. It's going to talk about athletes. It's going to talk about entertainers, how they use research to be popular. And if something happens, how do they switch that negative popularity to become positive again? You're going to look at how we set up statistical research. It's really pretty interesting when you look at controlled studies. Think of drug companies. They have to be able to study the effects of their drug versus no drug to see if it's beneficial or not. That's what they've been doing with the coronavirus, the vaccines. They had to have them in stage 3. This chapter explains how those are set up, how to know whether to believe them when you hear the blips about this study showed. So I know it's a long chapter, but it really lets you understand how polls, surveys, and controlled studies are done, because you can't believe them unless you understand how they're done. People ask me, how do you understand vaccines so well? And I go, well, I know how they're supposed to be done. I know how they should be set up. So that helps me understand what the drug companies are doing. I also have like a little bit of inside information. My granddaughter is a chemical engineer, and she works for a research company, a medical research company, and they actually make specialty drugs. They develop the beginnings. They don't manufacture drugs, but they partner with drug companies to make the beginnings that they sell to them to make the drugs. Her company was partnered with a company, and they produced the protein for the Moderna vaccine. So I asked her, because I feel like she's an expert rather than Joe Smo on the sidewalk. She knows what they're doing. So I get my information on the vaccines from a first-hand basis from her, and then I did further studies as to whether I wanted it or not. And I did. And I have been. And I'm still alive. So vaccines are fine. Anyway, long story short, interesting chapter. Interesting, especially if you're going into a medical field or nursing. You want to be a doctor. You want to be anything related to the medical field. I think you'll really enjoy this chapter to see how we do statistical research, because we use it, writers use it as reasons to support their conclusions. So, hope you enjoy. Give you a little bit heads up on this chapter. Bye. Got to turn it off now.